Hi everybody, welcome to Dynamo Sword Channel. I'm David, and today on Dynamo Sword Channel I will be presenting a sword re-review of the Windlass Effigy sword. This sword is an old discontinued model offered by Windlass many years ago. It holds a special place in my collection as it is the very first functional European medieval sword I ever purchased. So, how has this sword held up over the years, and what does it say about other older windlass models of its time period? Well, stay tuned and we'll find out. The Windlass Effigy sword is a direct replica of a 15th century sword seen on the brass effigy of Roger Elmbridge of Surrey, England. Not much is known of this young man, but from the epitaph on his effigy it reads, "Pray for Roger, surnamed Elmbridge, Esquire, covered by this stone, whose king delegated him sheriff of Surrey and Sussex. Death took him before he could take the position formally. He died on the day of St. Clement in the year 1437. Now, regarding his death, not much can be said, as the information on his epitaph is minimal. One could assume that perhaps he was a casualty of his appointed profession, or perhaps contracted the bubonic plague, as during the time of his death there was a resurgence of that plague in England. Unfortunately, it seems that no one will ever know, though I've always felt intrigued and in a sense honored to own a replica of this young man's sword, as well as a bond to its original owner and his place in history. The effigy of Roger Elmbridge rests in St. Mary the Virgin Parish in Beddington, Surrey, England, and is on display to this day. As far as the sword itself, not much can be fully deciphered, as it is both displayed two-dimensionally on the effigy and is housed in its scabbard. By its strong profile taper, single-handed grip, and hilt style fitting in the family J of the oakshot typology, it could be surmised that the sword could be of either the 15 or 18 blade types. Swords of these types were popular during the 15th century that Roger Elmbridge lived. The hilt itself is very well detailed on the effigy, and the guard is a clear example of a style 4 guard, and the pommel a variant of a type V1. A similar sword, part of the Castellan collection, has a similar blade profile and pommel, but the usual straight guard of style 11 seen on most swords of the Castellan collection. Regarding the reproduction, we can see that Windlass took pretty decent effort to replicate this sword from the examples shown on the effigy. As far as the blade of the effigy sword itself, I would classify it as a type 15 in the oakshot typology. The type 15 is believed to have been developed in the early part of the 14th century, but could have been developed as early as the later 13th century. What defines the type 15 is its pronounced diamond cross-section and acutely tapering blade profile. These defining features were developed to combat newer developments in armor, such as steel plate, rendering earlier cutting focused blades obsolete. One thing to this sword compared to the average type 15 is the addition of a fuller reaching nearly half of the blade's length. Now, fullers are normally atypical of the type, but there are a few examples of the type with fullers. Some may think that the addition of a fuller makes it more of a type 16 or even 18, but I feel the overall strongly tapering profile of the sword, fuller or not, meets more with the type 15 than any other blade type. Next, we'll look at the overall statistics of this sword. So its overall length is 48 1/4 inches. It has a weight of 2 1/4 pounds and a point of balance at 4 1/2 inches from the hilt. The center of percussion is right at about 22 inches from the hilt, and the class, due to its single-handed grip, would be an arming sword. The blade's total length is 32 inches. The blade width at the base is 1 3/4 inches, and that strongly tapers down to 1/2 inch at the tip. The material is a 1065 high carbon steel with a mirror polish. Its cross section is a pronounced diamond with a single fuller. The blade type, as mentioned earlier, it would be what I consider a Oakshot type 15. Now the guard's total length is 6 1/4 inches. The quillion dimensions is 5/8 by 1/2 inch, and that tapers to a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch at the lobe terminals. The material is brass, and it is finished with a nice high polish. The guard style, as also mentioned before, is what would be known as a style 4 guard in the Oakshot typology. The handle's total length is 3 3/4 inches. The circumference at the base is 3 inches, and that tapers to 2 1/2 inches at the pommel. The handle material is a wood core, and the grip material is, originally was a black 2mm cord leather wrap, and I replaced that actually quite recently with a black 1mm cord wrap. The grip also includes 2 brass ringlets. Now, the pommel's total length is 2 1/4 inches. The pommel's circumference at its widest is 4 1/2 inches. The material is brass, like the guard, and has a nice high polish finish. Its hilt construction is peened, and the pommel type is what would be known as a V1 or a variant of the V1. Now, this sword comes with the usual windlass leather scabbard. This is actually one of the older soft leather scabbards, and it features a brass throat and chain to match the hilt. As with most windlass swords, it fits moderately well, but there is no friction fit and slides easily when held upside down. Originally, the scabbard held rather tight, but over the years it has gotten looser, and it has acquired a few dings and nicks to its surface. But for an 11-year-old scabbard, it's held up well, and I feel that this kind of shows that these windlass leather scabbards have some longevity to them when cared for. So next up, I have some cutting footage to share, then we will move on to final thoughts. Hi and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the cutting footage. I bought this sword way back in October of 2010. And as I mentioned, it was the first functional European medieval sword I ever purchased. I've come a long way since that time in both sword ownership and knowledge of swords in general. Still, this sword holds quite a bit of sentimental value to me, but I'd also say it has helped me build a good expectation for how a quality budget production sword should handle and be constructed, as it is a very well made sword. The blade is nicely forged and heat treated, having good flexibility and durability that has lasted for the 11 years that I've owned it. I've cut with this sword numerous times over the years, and the edges stayed sharp, and there has been no nicks or bends to the blade. The guard has held up as well, and aside from a few dings on its surface, it's in just as good shape as when I first unboxed it. Its shape and dimensions are a sound representative of the historical style foreguard with its straight quillions and lobed terminals, and was cast well by Windlass. The handle has held up great as well, with no cracks or wear to the wood core. I've changed the sword's grip plenty of times over the years as I've tried different types of material. I've never really liked the original cord wrap, as I felt the diameter of cord was a little thick for the handle and looked off. Initially, I tried a wire wrap, which held up for a few years, and then for a while left the wood core exposed with a lacquer coating. About a year ago, I went back to leather cording for the grip and used a smaller 1mm black cord that I think looks better and feels much more comfortable than the original 2mm cord. I do miss that aesthetic of the wire wrap though. The pommel is nicely cast and very attractive. Unfortunately, it shows the most wear of any part of the sword, as around my third year with the sword, I tried some pel work and the peen became loose. So I had to eventually repeen the sword, and I did so via cold peening. That retightened the hilt, but sadly my inexperience at the time, as well as the softness of the brass, dinged the pommel top pretty bad. Like the guard, it also has a few other dings and marks to the finish that it has acquired over a few years. Now, there was another long discontinued windlass sword named the Castellan sword that shares the same blade minus the fuller and shares a similar brass guard and pommel, but with the more family typical style 11 guard. It seems, as far as museum replicas catalogs go, these two swords were sold at a similar time through the mid to late 2000s, and both saw their final sales on the museum replicas last chance sale in 2010. Though there are still a few European vendors who claim to have both swords in stock. But it's hard to say, as many of these vendors tend to not keep their inventory updated. The effigy sword can still be seen on Windlass's main site, now named the 1435 sword. I don't know why they changed the name, but since the sword is still showing on Windlass's website, it might still be available for purchase by either vendors or individual buyers as a reissue. Overall, this is a very nicely made sword and stands out as one of the better Windlass models from a time when their reputation for a well-made, balanced, and historically accurate sword was more or less hit and miss. Its simple yet historically accurate design stands out, and its origin and overall handling and aesthetics was definitely a stepping stone to what would become my passion for the medieval European sword, the history of medieval Europe in general, and it also gave me a strong focus and study on the oakshot typology, which in turn influenced my decision to share reviews and discuss swords on what would eventually become Dynamo Sword Channel. Well, I hope you enjoyed this re-review of the Windlass Effigy sword, as well as our little walk down memory lane. Be sure to like and subscribe, as well as look forward to future re-reviews of older discontinued swords in my collection. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.